You're joining us today for our webinar series titled Focus on the Family. And the entire purpose of this webinar is to promote self-education and self-growth. I'm really excited about our topic today. We're going to be talking about the Enneagram, how it can help your marriage, your relationships, and how knowing yourself can allow you to understand the lens through which you see the world. I'm very lucky and excited that my friend and Enneagram Coach, Shannon Anderson, has decided to join us today. Thank you, Shannon. Hi.
Thanks, Jenny. It's such an honor to be here. We have been friends for 6 years now, and I am just excited to educate people and introduce them to the Enneagram. A little bit about myself. I'm a wife, a mom of 3 littles, and we live in Atlanta, Georgia. I became an Enneagram coach in 2018, and one of my passions is helping people grow, helping people mend broken relationships, and helping families have a healthier family and ultimately build stronger communities. So that's what I love to do, and I'm excited to share some wisdom and hopefully inspire some of our guests today.
Well, that's awesome, and we're so happy that you're here. Let's jump right in. Can you just give us an overview for, some people have heard about the Enneagram, some people have no idea what it is. Tell me just a little bit, what is the Enneagram?
Sure. So let me go ahead and go to the next slide here. So what is the Enneagram? The Enneagram is simply a self-discovery tool that will help you understand the reasons why you think, feel, and behave in particular ways. It explains 9 personality types that exist in the world. I like to say, think of it as your internal GPS. It helps you know where you're at in this moment today, at the present, but where you need to go in order to grow and mature, but also where you go when you're under stress or living from an unhealthy place. The word Enneagram means 9 in Greek, and it's gram just means diagram. And as you can see from the image under that, in that picture, there are 9 points and 9 personality types, 9 numbers. Its purpose is simply to show us how to break free from the lies you tell yourself so that you can be your best self. I like to tell my clients that it's not enough to just say, this is the way that I am, and so it excuses your behavior. Instead, it actually helps you break free from those old patterns, because it's not a shield and it's not a sword to be used as a weapon of attack towards your spouse. For example, I know a lot about my husband's type and his motivations, but I know that I'm not to use that as a weapon against him, to manipulate him or to point it out as a negative thing. However, I can come alongside him and help him grow because of what I know. Does that make sense?
That does. One thing that I did forget to mention at the beginning is there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And if anyone wants to chat with us or has any questions for myself or Shannon, feel free to post that question, and we'll reserve about 10 minutes at the end for questions and just general discussion. But circling us back to what you were talking about, Shannon, I have a question. So we've all heard of personality tests, right? There's Myers-Briggs, there's all kinds that have floated around over the years. Can you explain to me what's the difference in the Enneagram and those other personality tests?
Absolutely. I've taken a lot of those personality tests in different corporate environments, as well as familiar with the strength finders. And I think those are all great to know your strengths and know your weaknesses. But I also love the Enneagram because it is so fluid and so in depth, and it doesn't just tell you this is the way that you are, because many people will read the results from these personality tests and say, okay, that's the way that I am, and now what? or so what. The Enneagram actually gives you a path to growth. That's why we like to call it an internal GPS, because it shows you a way to break free from yourself. And that's how it's different than others.
Well, I'm really excited to hear some more about this. How, I mean, this is a great question. How does the Enneagram help us grow?
Yep. So the Enneagram helps us grow because it can show us what we're like and show us how other people see us. Many times we think we know who we are, but we often are unconscious to the way that other people see us. So it brings up dialogue, actually, in friendships, in relationships, families, and with your spouse. How do you see me? You can ask your spouse that. So it opens up this amazing dialogue and gives us language to communicate better. It can help us control these self-defeating behaviors and transform those behaviors into self or personal empowerment. So if I'm aware that I can be manipulative because my core desire is for people to love me, and being aware that that's my desire, I can stop myself from doing something just to get the love and affection from a spouse or a friend or a family member, and instead do something for that person out of pure altruistic love. And that's purely transformative for my life because it removes any bitterness or resentment that I might have if that affection is not returned, because I'm not doing it to receive anything. Does that make sense?
It does. So understanding those, I think we're going to get into the core fears and the motivations
In the next
a
slide.
little bit, but just generally understanding what yours are and what your spouses or your ex-spouses or even a coworker, it sounds like that would be really telling. And when someone's behaving in a way that you don't necessarily agree with or understand.
Right. The Enneagram also shows us what we're like when we are growing. And this is one of my favorite parts of it, because I think in our culture, we do not pause long enough to celebrate our successes or celebrate our personal growth. We're very quick to point out, especially in our spouse, where they're falling short. But how much stronger would your marriage be if you were able to see and recognize your significant other growing and having success in personal success or relational success, and say to them, like, I'm so proud of you. I noticed that you used to do this, but now you're doing this, and that's growth. So being able to recognize that growth and celebrate it, I think, is a really also unique reason and example of how it can help us grow. It also can transform our relationships by allowing us to have more, and this is key, right? This is the key thing. It gives us more compassion, more forgiveness, and more understanding of one another. That's what we need, and that's what's going to create stronger families in the long run.
Yeah, and it sounds like understanding those things could better any type of relationship that you have with anyone.
Right.
So you said that the Enneagram is based on 9 numbers. Can you tell us a little bit about each of those numbers?
Absolutely. So what are the 9 personality types? I want to point out that each number is equal in value. So no number is greater than the other, and all numbers are necessary and needed in the world. The first type is type 1, the moral perfectionist. Now, these individuals are the idealistic, purposeful, self-disciplined, perfectionist type. You know you're a 1. If you see the world through black and white, and you don't, your core desire is to be a good girl or a good boy. or morally correct, and you believe that there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. I like to use the example of if you load the dishwasher and your spouse comes and reloads it because you didn't load it the wrong way, you might be married the right way. You might be married to a type 1, because they're very particular. And that's a very general, not all type 1s might not behave that way. I do want to say, before I go through all these numbers, it's not the behavior that defines your type. It is your core motivation. So it is your core fear, your core desire, and your core weakness. Those three things about each number is what you will use to determine which number you are. And I won't have time to go through all of the core fears, core motivation, the core desire, the core weaknesses of each number today, but I will be able to explain what each number is. So type 2 is a supportive advisor. I'm a type 2, and these individuals are the most outgoing on the Enneagram. They love to be around people. They're very generous. They're very caring. They're people pleasers. But on the downside, they can be very possessive, especially to the people that they love and they cling to. Highly, highly relational individuals. Then you have the type 3, the successful achiever. These are adaptable, they're excelling, they're leaders, they're very driven. On the downside, they can be very image conscious, and they care a lot about what people think of them, what they wear, and how they look. Type 4, they're the romantic individuals, and these are the most expressive, sometimes dramatic, sometimes self-absorbed, mental on the Enneagram. They are what I think of when I think of 4s. They're the artists, the musicians, the poets, the creative types. Sometimes they're melancholy. They're very in tune with their feelings. Then you have the investigative thinker, the type 5. These are perceptive, innovative, secretive, and sometimes isolated. They're more introverted individuals, but they have a wealth of knowledge. They love to research everything. They want to know about everything. Then you have type 6, the loyal guardian, and these are engaging, responsible, sometimes anxious, and suspicious. The loyal guardians, I like to say, make the best friends because they're the best planners. They form these little micro communities amongst their friends. They search for security in their relationships, and they're very detailed, similar to the ones in their planning. Then you have the type 7s, and these are the entertaining optimists. They're the life of the party, spontaneous, versatile, acquisitive, sometimes scattered, constantly filling up their bucket with new ideas and new experiences, extremely outgoing, similar to the type 2s. Then you have type 8, that's the protective challengers. These are also natural born leaders. They're self-confident, very decisive, very willful, assertive. Sometimes it can come off as confrontational. Sometimes they're described as the snowplows, and it comes off as they don't care what other people think of them. They're going to do what they know to be right, and they're very confident. Then you have the last but not least, the peaceful mediators, and these are the most receptive, reassuring, agreeable, and often complacent friends. They bring a peaceful energy into the room, also very people-pleasing, similarly to type 2s. So I want to point out to the right of my screen, this is the Enneagram diagram that we're looking at. And as you can see at the top, you have the type 9, and every single number is connected to 2 other numbers through what we like to call the arrows. So you can see a 9 is connected to a loyal guardian, the 6, and a successful achiever, the type 3. These arrows are the path of growth and the path of stress. So when a 9 is stressed, they move towards the unhealthy side of a type 6. When a 9 is growing, they might behave and look more like the healthy side of a successful achiever, the type 3. Is that helpful to point out where?
It is. And I actually, it's funny, you go through these lists and you explain each person, and the way at least my brain works is I start dumping people into these numbers, right? So you are telling me about a number 1, which is where I lean, but then going into the other numbers, I think of my clients, I think of other attorneys that I may work with, my husband. And a question I have about that is, if we're looking at these numbers, it's very easy to label, right? To put someone in a box.
Yep.
And how is the Enneagram different, and how does it allow us to really not just dump someone in a box and do what you said earlier of, hey, this is who I am, take it or leave it?
So just the opposite, Jenni. The purpose is to actually get you out of that box that you put yourself in. So we develop our personalities throughout our childhood as a way to avoid our core fear or achieve our core desire. And I'll just use me for example. My core fear was to be loved and accepted. And I'm a type 2. That's the type 2's core fear. My core desire is the same as my core fear. My core desire is to be loved and accepted. So I developed, and this happened from my parents and my peers, different interactions with people growing up. I developed this personality, and this core fear of mine was that I was so afraid that I was unlovable, which is believing a lie that I'm unlovable. And therefore I developed this personality to try and make everybody to like me and love me, because I'm trying to achieve my core desire. And that's where our personalities come from. They come from our experiences. So the Enneagram is not to put you in a box. It's just the opposite. It's to help you break free from that box that you put yourself in as you were growing up, to try and achieve what your core desire was and is, and or try to avoid what your core fear is.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I liked what you had said, and I have a question about it is, you were explaining the arrows of going to a place in stress or a place in, success. And
growth or stress.
yeah, so how does that help you understand someone else, whether it's your spouse or your best friend or maybe your ex, understanding where they go in those times?
Well, I'll start by saying the individual has to be willing to be vulnerable and to have these conversations. I think I highly recommend going to counseling. The Enneagram coaching does not take the place of counseling. I think it's a great supplement for counseling, for couples counseling, but a lot of counselors are using the Enneagram as a tool to give their clients language to use. So when you have two people going to couples counseling or family counseling, the individual has to be willing to read the core fear and the core desire and the core weakness and do a self-assessment and say, yes, this is where I identify as. Not me going to my husband and saying, this is what your core fear is and this is what your core desire. I cannot determine anyone's motivations. We can look at their behaviors, which is what is here on the screen next to all the types and the descriptions. These are just behaviors, but several numbers on the Enneagram can behave alike. The 9s and the 2s, you will see a 9 and a 2 people please and be very agreeable. However, my motivation is to get, I'm a type 2 and I am people pleasing because I want people to love me. My type 9 friend is people pleasing because she wants harmony and peace in the relationship. She does not want to cause any strife or disruption in the relationship. So we may behave the exact, but our motivations are very different. So that's why I like to tell people the Enneagram is all about your motivations. And you can't really, you can guess what your spouse's motivation, but unless that individual says outwardly what their motivation is, then you know. So it's all about assessment and self-awareness.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
helpful?
Yeah, so helpful. I think that that kind of goes back to the question that I had asked about putting labels and putting a box around certain people because, you know, my husband, he's taken the test and he's an 8 and he's a pretty strong 8. But knowing that he's doing something, his behavior may be the exact same, or anyone's behavior may be the exact same, but you could classify them in a different number if you were just throwing something at that.
Yeah, and the Enneagram is not something that you can just learn in an hour. It's a self journey of self-discovery and awareness. So this is a great introduction, but I would encourage everyone to have ongoing conversations with your spouse and ask the questions like, what are you really afraid of? Are you afraid of being unloved or unliked by, your colleagues? Or are you afraid of tension in the relationship, which can be kind of the same thing? Or let me use a different example. Are you afraid that if you're vulnerable, someone will use that vulnerability against you as a weapon? That's the core fear of an 8. They don't want to be vulnerable because it's a way of self-preservation. The fear is that once they're vulnerable, then someone will take that vulnerability and use it as a weapon against them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to exactly what you were saying as far as knowing that information and not ever using it against the person. So if that's a core fear of an 8 and you use information that you have against them, that's probably going to shut them down. But understanding that that is a core fear of them could make substantial changes in your relationship.
Tremendous changes in your relationship.
So I think that this was a great overview of the actual numbers, and I want to get into a little bit of the fears with each number. But something that I want to address is I believe that you were telling me about centers of intelligence and how the numbers are grouped together. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'd be happy to. Well, the next slide is actually the structure of the Enneagram, and I don't need to spend too much time on it, but I do just want to point out, we already pointed out the arrows of growth and stress, but I did not touch on wings. So wings are the numbers on each side of your number. So if I'm a 2, my wings are a 1 and a 3. And that just means that at any given time, I can pull personality traits from a type 1 or a type 3. Like you said, you're not just one number, you're a combination of several different numbers. And then the levels arrows are where you move towards growth and stress, like I mentioned before. And my arrow as a 2 is when I'm stressed, I move towards an 8. And when I'm growing, I move towards a type 4, the romantic individual. Then last but not least is the levels of development. And that helps you understand if you are an healthy, average, or an unhealthy type. So you and I might be the same number. We say we both identify as a type 2, but I might be a really unhealthy type 2. And you might be a more healthy type 2. And so our behaviors are going to look very different, but our motivations are the same. I just think that's really important to point out.
Yeah, and I have a question about that. Can you tell me a little bit just explain a little bit more the difference between a wing and an arrow.
Absolutely. So a wing is the number on either side of your main type. So your main type is the number that you, after doing self-assessment, identify with the core fear and the core desire and the core weakness. So that's your main number. So if you're a 7, your wings, plural, because you have 2 wings, are the 2 numbers that are beside you on the chart. So if you're a 7, your wings are an 8 or a 6. Most people have a dominant wing and a not so dominant wing, meaning that you pull from one number more often than you pull from another. So for example, I'm a 2 with a 3 wing. So I identify as somebody who longs to feel loved and be accepted, but I also identify with the achiever and am very ambitious, and I'm very concerned about feeling successful and feeling capable. So most of the time, I see a lot of the personality traits come out in me that I pull from a type 2, or from a type 3. I like to call it our salt and pepper. If you're making eggs, you put salt and pepper on your scrambled eggs. You usually use a little bit more salt than you do pepper. So my 3 is my salt and my type 1 is my pepper. I can pull from one when I need to. If I'm having to plan an event, I need to pull from the 1 perfectionist. I need to be detailed. I need to be organized. I can pull from that. It's really a strength that you can rely on. So being aware of your wings is necessary to know yourself better and understand what you look like and how you behave. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, and so to go back to what you asked me about triads and centers of intelligence. So if your clients are looking to, the first step is to identify what your Enneagram number is. In my opinion, the best and easiest way or quickest way to figure out what your number is through looking at a grouping of the 9 personality types, or what we call groups of 3, a triad. So this grouping of 3 is called the centers of intelligence, the 3 centers of intelligence. So the first one is type 8, 9, and 1. So these 3 numbers, 8s, 9s, and 1s, are in the instinctual triad, or the gut. And they share a common desire, and that is justice, and they share the struggle of anger. So you might be an 8, a 9, or a 1 if you see a theme there in your life. Is the theme of justice, of wanting justice, and is the theme of anger there? And you can start reading about the 8s, 9s, and 1s if you identify with that common desire and common struggle. Then we have
different than the fear that you were talking about earlier, the common fear. Is the common struggle different?
Of the instinctual triad.
Yeah. So this is talking about the common desire and fear of these 3, or the struggle, I'm sorry, of these 3 numbers. But earlier we were talking about each number has a common fear, right?
Yes.
And that's different.
And I don't have that in front of me at this moment, Jenny. I'm sorry.
Well, no, that's okay. And I know we don't have time to go over each number's fear. But
I don't. Yeah, so each number has a different fear, correct. Yeah, and yeah, we could go through that, but that's the core motivations that I mentioned that will help you identify your number. This is just one way to narrow it down to 3. So instead of reading all 9 types and all their core motivations, you can just know the common desire and common struggles of 3 types or one of the groups and narrow it down. A simpler way to do this is to ask yourself, how do you make decisions? Are you someone who makes decisions with your gut, which is the gut triad? So I like to tell people, if you're shopping for a house, you're house hunting, and you step into that home, do you have a gut feeling that this is the house that you need to buy? Or are you in the heart center, which is a 2, 3, or 4, and just have this emotional reaction to this house, and you get emotionally attached, which is when I was shopping for a house with my husband, I would walk into these homes and I would say, this just feels right. I just feel like this is our home. And he is in the head center, or the thinking triad, and his response would be, this doesn't make sense of where it's located, to our job, or the HOA fees, or the money doesn't add up for the space, or he is very much a logical decision maker. So he's in the head center, or the thinking triad. He identifies as a type 7. So for your clients looking at this, are you in the gut, the feeling, or the thinking triad? You can then find your triad and then eliminate the other 6 and focus on narrowing it down to 3.
And then from there, reading about those 3 specific types, their common, I think you said motivator, maybe, or their
Desire, the common desire.
and fear. So if you know, hey, I'm someone who just goes with my gut. I feel like a decision is right and I'm going to go for it. I don't need someone talking me into it. I don't need to feel about it. I'm probably in the gut triad, right?
Correct.
And then I focus on those 3 numbers.
And that's where I would start. I would start by reading the motivations for 8s, 9s, and 1s. If you believe that you make decisions off your gut, read descriptions, read the core motivations for 8, 9s, and 1s. If you know that you're a feeler, you're a 2, 3, or a 4, because those 3 are in the feelings triad. Now they operate differently. 2s feel other people's. 3s feel repress their feelings often, and 4s, we like to say, are in their feelings, so they heavily feel their own feelings. So that is manifested and looks different in every number, but they share a goal, and that's 2s, 3s, and 4s. They want significance. They want to have significance in the world, and they battle with shame. And then the head center, the thinking triad, their common desire is security. So they do things because they want security. 5s want internal security. 7s want external security. They're afraid of being abandoned. 6s are afraid of being physically abandoned. And for 7s, it's really that emotional security, and they don't like to share their feelings because they're afraid of being in emotional pain. So not talking about heavy and hard things is a way to stay secure for a 7. And you'll see in 5, 6, and 7s, they all tend to struggle with some form of anxiety. And I know that's a big word. That's a word that we throw around a lot, but it doesn't mean that they're depressed. It just means that anxiety looks differently in all 3 numbers. And it doesn't mean that 2s, 3s, and 4s don't have anxiety, because all the numbers can have anxiety, but you just see this reoccurring theme in those numbers.
I think that you've given me such a good understanding of the overall idea of what the Enneagram is and some background on each numbers, but I would like to maybe ask some questions, just practical questions. In your life, you and your husband have both kind of dived into the Enneagram and really focused on self-growth. How have you seen it help your marriage or other people's marriage?
Yeah, so personally, when we've been married for 9 years and we have 3 kids, and every time we introduce a new baby into our family, it's a stressful season. Naturally, neither one of us are sleeping, And last summer, our third was born, and Eric and I had spent the last 12 months really reading about the Enneagram and having conversations about our own personal desires and fears. And I can't preach this enough that the level of intellectual and emotional intimacy that grew between us was exponential in all of our years in marriage. And I think it really prepared us for the season when our third was born. So I like to tell this story. When the baby was probably 2 or 3 weeks old, he woke up at 3 a.m. for his feeding, and we were so exhausted, both of us, in the middle of the night. And I said to him, bring me the baby in bed so that I can nurse him. And he would not bring me the baby. He refused, and he kept saying, no, that's not what the book says. We read a baby book that said, go to the room, nurse him in his bedroom with the lights out in the dark, so it's boring, so you can lay him back in the crib and he can go back to sleep. And I said, I don't care what the book says, just bring me the baby. And he refused and told me I was doing this wrong, and he was angry with me, and I think a few harsh words were thrown back and forth at each other. And ultimately he ended up bringing me the baby, but it still caused a lot of tension in our marriage because the next day we were not speaking to one another. And then by the afternoon, I received a phone call from him. And the first thing he said was, I've been thinking a lot about the way that I behave when I'm in stress. And I was behaving like an unhealthy one. I was demanding perfection from you, and I was telling you that there is a right way and a wrong way to take care of your child at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'm sorry for that. And knowing that he was able to understand himself and why he behaved that way gave me so much compassion and empathy for him. And I was so quick to forgive. And I think he was quicker to come to me because he had language to wrap around his behavior. And moving forward, I know that his core fear is being trapped and being an emotional pain as a type 7. And so a few weeks knowing that, I planned a party in our basement, and I hired a cook to come and cook us, invited some friends over. And afterwards, he said to me, doing that meant so much to me because you gave me a fun experience, even though we weren't able to leave our home because we had 3 small children and we had just had a baby. And so it helps you to love your spouse better, and it helps you to have more compassion for one another. And so knowing that is just going to grow your marriage in ways that you really put a value on. I think it's invaluable to you, and it has been to me personally. And we continue to have these conversations around what type of job should he take, knowing what his core fear and core desires are. Should he take a role that is going to make him, sit still in an office at one place where he'd rather be going out and meeting different people all day long because that brings him joy? The diversity and the excitement of not knowing what each day is going to look like truly brings him joy. And I know that. And so I'm able to say, what is this job going to look like? I don't know if you should consider this job, or if you do, just be aware that this might be a downside and you might really struggle with this. So it can help you in all areas of life.
Well, and I love that because, you think by your third kid, why are you reading a baby book, right? Like you're thinking that you have it all figured out.
No.
It comes back to the fact of you probably had that same problem with baby number 1, but you didn't have the tools to get out of that argument.
Yeah.
And it's huge to see, just knowing and educating yourself on your behavior and his. It really comes back to what we talked about earlier about knowing yourself and understanding the lens through which you see the world, but also understanding the lens through which he saw the world, because y'all had the same problem, but a very different reaction.
Absolutely. And I'd be happy to share with you, after our second was born, 6 months after he was born, I remember going to him and crying and saying, I just feel like you don't love me anymore. And I felt like we were in crisis mode. And I booked us a couples retreat for a weekend because I felt like my marriage was falling apart. Again, I'm highly emotional. I'm in the heart center, a triad. But looking back and after having conversations with him, that wasn't true. He did love me, but he was coping in different ways that I do. Like, I will hover and work really hard to get love and attention, whereas when he's stressed, he pulls away. And I know now why he was behaving the way that he was behaving when we had our second, when we were just 6 years into the marriage. And so, like you said, moving forward, when we go through seasons of high stress, like we're currently in one, he was furloughed recently. And so I was able to have conversations with him at the beginning of his furlough, knowing that he's going to be here every single day with us in the house. I said to him, okay, I think it's going to be important for you to get out and golf once a week, because I think that you need to break up this monotony. And he said, I think you're right.
He's like, I think you're the smartest woman I've ever met.
Yeah, he loves the Enneagram, by the way.
Yes. So let me give you a totally different scenario.
Okay.
We have, assume that it's a marriage that failed. They have a child. They are divorced. They're, attempting to co-parent with this child. And the child keeps getting in trouble at school. And they are addressing the issue very differently, right? The same issue, but they take two very different approaches. Mom wants to address it one way, dad wants to address it another way. And it's a problem that just keeps coming up again and again. How could the Enneagram help in that situation?
Okay, so let's say we have a type 3, an achiever, and a type 9, a peacemaker in the relationship. So knowing, we have to always go back to the core fear, core desire. So knowing what the core fear of a type 3 would be is looking like they're incapable as a parent, looking like a failure. So if you are a type 9, you're able to communicate with your ex and say, this by no means that you're failing as a parent, but so you can ease their fear and say that this is not a reflection of you and this is not a reflection of me, but we have to come together to help our child. And we'll talk about this on the next webinar when we speak about the numbers in parenting and how your number plays out into your parenting styles. But you have to be aware of your co-partner, your co-parents' motivations behind everything, because it spills out into their reactions. Now, on the other side, the type 9 parent might be reluctant to go into the principal's office and address it, or to even bring it up with the teacher if it's going to cause conflict, or bring it up with the co-parent. And so that's something that the type 9 needs to be aware of to overcome that, because sometimes you can't avoid conflict. You can't avoid it, especially not when kids are involved. And that's why I think family counseling is so necessary, to learn how to co-parent together, learning your parenting styles, learning what your core fears and what your core desires are. I keep telling you this, that I have a core desire to feel loved and accepted. Now, I have that same desire for my children. So recently, we decided to repeat kindergarten for my 5-year-old. And one thing that was holding me back that I began to realize through my knowledge of the Enneagram is that I was afraid to hold her back because I was afraid that the kids were going to make fun of her and that she would feel unloved and rejected by her peers. And so that my own core fear was potentially hindering. It isn't, because we decided, I aired on, no, I need to break free. Again, get out of the box, break free from my own core fear and desires to put my child's needs before my own needs. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. I like, this isn't a magic pill, right? So knowing your number, knowing your strengths, knowing your fears, it doesn't resolve your problems, but it kind of goes back to the purpose of this webinar in self-growth, self-education, and just being aware of why you do things, of why your spouse does things, of why your ex-spouse does things, what motivates them, what they're afraid of, is just the beginning to improve those relationships.
Mm-hmm. I love that you said that. This is just the beginning. This is the beginning of a lifelong journey of self-wisdom and knowledge, a lifelong journey of self-awareness. People who are more self-aware are more likely to catch themselves in the act. I caught myself in the act when I was having to make the decision whether to move my daughter forward in school or keep her back. I was aware that I was having these thoughts that she's going to be made fun of, she's going to be rejected, and I had to take that thought captive and say, no, that's my fear. She's not aware of that.
Yeah. And what a relief as a parent.
Yeah, that's right. There's freedom. Exactly. There is so much freedom in knowledge and wisdom. There is so much freedom in it. It can help you break free from your old ways of thinking and your own patterns. And we are unconsciously aware that we even do this. And the Enneagram is all about bringing what is in your unconscious mind to the front to your conscious mind.
That's awesome. Well, we have about 10 minutes left. I've got some questions that I want to go over and ask you. I think some of these we've actually just addressed through speaking to one another, but let's go through them and talk about the ones that we haven't. And then we can address next steps of how people can dive deeper and about our next Enneagram that we talked about is related to more specifically parenting. So we have a question that one of the participants asked, and it says, can your Enneagram number change over your lifetime, or do they remain the same?
That's a great question, Tracy. Thank you for asking. Your number stays the same. It does not change. Your core number always be your core number, but you change and as you towards your growth number. And there's also, which we didn't on, something the missing piece, or it's the number that you will begin to look like when you've been in a healthy place for a long time. So for example, I'm a 2, and when I've done a ton of work in my own life for long periods of time and grown, I will begin to take on the healthy traits of a type 8. Instead of being so concerned about what other people think of me and getting acceptance from others, I will now be confident like a type 8 is. I won't really care what other people say or how they feel about me, because I won't be working from a place to gain their love. Does that make sense?
That does. And so did that come back to the arrows that you talked about?
Yes. So okay. So you need to know, first step is know your main type. Second step is know where you in growth and stress. So know your main type, then know your other 2 points, which is the stress and growth arrow, and then also read about your wings. So you really need to be learning numbers.
So,
Which is what a coach will help you do. That's what my coaching is all about, is like learning the different dynamics of how you work and what you need to break free from.
great. We have, this person knows their number, so it's a interesting question, but it says, I'm a 9 and my ex is a 3. How, do you have any suggestions on how we can best deal with each other?
My first suggestion is to work on yourself, and being more self-aware of the things that you need to break free from, the lies that you need to break free from. So if it's for a 9, if your core fear is being in conflict, and a 3 is not necessarily afraid of conflict, you need to actually move more towards that healthy side of a 3, because that's where the arrow of growth is. A 9 moves towards a 3. And so my suggestion would be to work, to do self-growth, realize that no, like what it looks like for me to work well with my type 3 spouse, actually to look and to be an example of what he should look like in his healthiest form. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that we've heard time and time again that changing your behavior changes the behavior of others, right? And the first thing is working on yourself, and how just doing that alone will substantially change those relationships.
Yep, 100%, 100%. Do you want to ask another one? I see a few other ones that are good on.
So another good question is, do some types get along better with others?
I do see this. I think that 2s and 9s get along really well because we love to please people, and we're both very harmonious, and we're both very positive. Same thing for 7s. 7s, 2s, and 9s are the most positive numbers on the Enneagram. And so we tend to see the world through the lens of positivity. If it's raining, you might hear a 7 say, we really needed the rain. The flowers needed it, or our grass is so dry. And so they think of it as positive, whereas a not so positive number might say, oh man, we can't go outside on a walk today, and think of it as a negative. But yeah, we see that. I think 6s and 1s get along really well because their attention to detail and planning makes their personalities mesh well. But you can get along with everyone as long as you understand that person. So all numbers can get along well, especially if they're healthy and they're doing the work.
We've got a few questions that are specifically related to parenting and children, and I want to save those questions for our next webinar, since that's going to be the sole focus. But we did have a question about any books or websites where they can get more information and educated on the Enneagram. Can you give any suggestions for resources? And then
Sure can. I'd be happy to. So a couple websites, yourenneagramcoach.com. That's yourenneagramcoach.com. Beth McCord's website has free assessments for couples to take. You can get a marriage assessment to see what some of the pitfalls and positive sides to your relationship. You can do that for free. You can also take a free assessment website. Another one I would recommend is the Enneagram Institute. I think that's .org, Enneagram Institute. And then you can follow me on Instagram at The Helpful Enneagram, as well. Visit my website if you're interested in doing one-on-one coaching. I also do couple coaching, and each of those is 5 sessions where we will work together. It's customized, tailored. We find out what your number is, and then we walk through the wings. We walk through the levels of development and the growth and stress arrows, and then create a plan for yourself to move forward and help you break free of some of the old patterns that you've been dealing with.
Well, that's all great information. If you could go to the slide with our contact information so that everyone has your information, what we will do is we will send out an email with your email, your website, and how they can get in contact with you. And I am so thankful that you took your time today to talk to us, and I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to our next webinar where we really focus on parenting styles, and our projections that we make based on our number on our children. And we'll be releasing that date over the next few days. It's most likely going to be week after next, but I'm just so thankful, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jenny. I also want to add, this book is a great resource, The Road Back to You. It's by Ian Cron and Susan Stabile, and it's a great introduction to the Enneagram. You can read about all 9 types, and he uses wonderful narratives of people's life stories to help you understand it better. But thank you. I really am happy that you had me on today, and I'm excited to talk about parenting when we meet again. And I want to also say, don't hesitate to contact me directly. My phone number and my email is on there. Even if you just have a question and you just want me to answer that one-off, you can email me directly, and I'm happy to answer that for you anytime.
Well, thank you so much, Shannon. I hope everyone has a great day, and I hope you join our second webinar.
Thank you, Jenny. And bye, everyone. You guys have a great day.